Hey, good morning, my vlog subscribers. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I think is really important when it comes to comparing and analyzing different products in a software sense as well as in other senses, and that is the concept of feedback and how you can make your life easier by learning how to be a good feedback provider, how important it is, and some of the excuses people give for why they don't provide feedback. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those. First of all, let's say that you aren't happy with a lot of the chairs in your life, and so you want the perfect chair. And so what you do is you go and you find like a woodworker. You decide wood is something you prefer. So you go to a woodworker and you say, hey, I'd like to make the perfect chair, and I don't care what it costs. Um, can you help me, make the perfect chair for me? And so what they're going to do is they're going to talk about various designs that they're familiar with already, and they're going to maybe look at how you sit and all these things, and they're going to measure you. And then they're going to build you a chair out of their experience and their mental catalog for chair building, that's going to be a pretty good fit, and that'll be a good investment for you. But the way it becomes the perfect chair is through an iterative process where you become more than just a job for this person who's designing the chair. They really get to know. They might even watch you using the chair, and they start coming up with refinements and coming up with versions of the chair that are designed. They might watch you use the chair, and then they might think of a refinement to make that they never really mentioned to you, and they might remember to add it. And then they'll give you a new version of the chair, and then they'll watch how you use it. And this iterative process will eventually result in better and better chairs, possibly by a smaller and smaller margin. It could come to a point where you just want to use a darn chair and you don't really want this person trying to make it better. But ultimately, that's a really great position to be in if you care about a good chair, is having the chair makers trying to make the best chair for you. Now, if you scale that up to maybe it's a company that, now that the guy has figured out, or the woman, they've figured out a way to improve the chair for you. They start realizing that a lot of people, in watching you, they realize that a lot of people, every time they go out to a coffee shop or whatever, they see the same types of frustrations and problems, and so they start designing a chair that brings these features to everyone. And some people are not going to like those features, possibly. Maybe they'll be uncomfortable for them, or they won't suit their needed mode. But, one of the things that the chair maker is trying to do is just to try to appeal to the largest market segment possible, because the more people they appeal to, the more people are likely to consider their chair as an option. So, it used to be, it seemed like a lot of software was designed to suit the needs primarily of the people designing it, and then they would unleash it on the masses, and there didn't seem to be a lot of, there was maybe some feedback from top customers, maybe in the form of complaints, and maybe there were some things that the developers, they just wanted to add and thought about adding, themselves, or they got requests from, once again, usually companies with a lot of money, and that kind of drove the software development process. But one thing that we're seeing now more and more is a democratization of software design. And I'm not just talking about open source stuff, where a little bit of this, a lot of it goes on, but more so for the developers involved. The attitude is, well, if you don't like it, why don't you, fork it, develop the feature yourself, and then submit a pull request, and that will theoretically get new features added. But I've done that myself on things that, like, for example, there was an app I used, and it just frustrated me that the I think there was like something like a list of cities or something. And the list of cities in the app were added just in the order that the cities were added to the list. So they were random. It was like a worldwide list of cities, and it was seemingly random because it was however they thought, oh, let's add Amsterdam. And so Amsterdam would be like the last one on the list. And I thought, wow, this is really this doesn't make sense to me because I'm used to having cities alphabetized or maybe sorted by countries or something. So I went, and it was just a web project, so I went and I downloaded it, and then I sorted the list alphabetically so that if you said, well, I'm from Columbus, I'll go down to the C's and see the city listed there. To me, it made a lot more sense. And so I went and I pulled down the code and I spent the time making the changes, and then I submitted a pull request, and they said, what'd you do that for? We don't want it alphabetized. And they just chucked it. And it's like, well, okay, so then I could go and branch it, but it's like, it's not software I really cared about all that much. But it just goes to show you that even if you have a pretty obvious good idea, my experience is that the open source community, it depends a lot on who's running the project. So the software that I probably use most fundamentally on a daily basis is Windows 10. And I think in October of 2014, they announced a thing called the Insiders Program. I think it was actually for Windows 8. And what they did is they were going to start giving people special access to not the most internal builds, but once they got them through the basic process, they were going to let a large number, like potentially at least thousands, probably a million people, go and look at all this stuff and use it on a daily basis. They cautioned, don't use this on any production equipment. Run it on like a backup machine and run it as a VM and stuff like that so that you don't lose any data and stuff like that. But anyway, they started this process, and they had a thing called the Customer Experience Improvement Program. And so what they did with that is, it was always opt-in. I've never seen any evidence that it was not opt-in, but this is used often as one of the reasons that Microsoft is evil, is that they spy on everyone and they collect your data without permission. Every time I've seen that setting, it's always been unchecked by default after an install, and I've had to check it myself. But I also want to improve my customer experience, and I've seen evidence that that is how the data is being used. They promise it's not being used for other reasons, but I'm seeing evidence that it is being used to improve customer experience, so I opt in. And I also opted into the Windows Insider program for the same reason. What this did is it gave me the capability to, as I was using the software, I would encounter a crash, I would encounter an error, I would encounter an app that doesn't work properly, I would encounter a feature that I wanted, and I could very easily, I had a place where I could go and I could voice that in a public way to the other insiders, and they could vote on or contribute to whether or not they supported that view of using the software. So I've kind of been, I've been really involved in this program since about 2014, and I think it's really important for anyone who has opinions on the software they use, which should be anyone who wants to use software to make their life better, that they should be, anytime they encounter something that doesn't work the way they should, or they have an idea for how it could work better, I think they owe it to themselves and to the other users of the program to share the way that they're using it. And it usually only takes 5 minutes. Especially with the modern tools that are available. There's a thing called the feedback tool in Windows 10 versions, and here's a look at it running on a Surface Pro. And one of the things that I think is interesting about it is so you can hit the Windows F keyboard combination, and what it does is it takes a screenshot of what you're seeing at that moment, and then it embeds it, and you can either provide a suggestion or you can report something that's not working right. Now, if you report something that's not working right, you also have the option to record telemetry. So what you do is you turn on a recording, and then you go back and you do the thing that caused the problem. And it records what your system was doing, what Windows was doing, what the app was doing when you experienced the problem, like an error message popped up or whatever. And it lets you package that in and send it out to the developers. And I just have had such incredible luck with this. I mean, one can see this is the list of my achievements. They let you track achievements on the in the app as well, and it just talks about it's very much like Xbox achievements, and I just think I don't really do anything for the achievements. I just use the device and provide feedback so that the software gets better and better for me. But it's kind of nice to I'm silencing my phone. It's kind of nice after you've done all that work to see it recognized, I guess. And so one of the things, I'll just put my phone here. So anyway, I started, because I saw so much value in the feedback, and this works on hardware devices too. So if you get like a Surface Pro or a Surface Studio that's run by Microsoft, you can say, I'm having this trouble on this hardware, on this specific hardware, and even if it's non-Microsoft hardware, providing feedback on an error on a specific piece of hardware. I've seen things that, there are things that they can do that seem to address the issue on different pieces of hardware, and I've seen them do that. One nice thing about it is when you do provide feedback, after it gets accepted, you can actually get a link and share it. So oftentimes I'll put these things on Twitter, features I'd like to see, things that are broken for me and bother me, and I'd like to just get more attention to it. So more people pile on, and then eventually it becomes more of a priority in the queue for things to fix. Right now, yesterday's video was about email security. Right now, one of my big beefs that has like zero attention is that Microsoft doesn't, in the current mail app, they don't allow like Outlook.com users to encrypt things or have private keys. If you have an Office 365 account with an enterprise, you can do that, but they don't really allow consumers to do it. And I suspect one of the reasons is that when an enterprise allows encryption, they also have a key to it, and they can open up the message. And so if law enforcement has a concern about a message, then they can just go to your company and say, hey, we're law enforcement, give us this, or else we'll mess with you in a regulatory sense. You must comply with us, or we'll shut you down. And businesses tend, most of the ones I've seen, when the law comes knocking, then they just, belly over and, oh, please leave us alone. That's just our employee. Yeah, do what you want with him, but leave us alone. And so they'll hand over anything on an employee. Now, if it's an accusation of corporate wrongdoing, that's when they tend to lawyer up and maybe fight it a little bit more. So if it affects their business, they seem to object, but otherwise not. And so I think the problem here is that if Microsoft allows encryption for just end users, then there's no real middleman to step in if law enforcement asks them for that. And so it puts them in a difficult position of they'll be asked to add a backdoor and kind of serve the role as that person. And I would imagine they would just rather not have that distraction. So right now they're leaving it to third parties like Proton Mail and Tutanota to allow encryption. And I would imagine that's some of the reason why encryption is kind of taking a backseat in some of their other products. So anyway, back on the feedback, I've provided feedback on that issue, and that's one that I'm watching. And if anyone shares my thoughts on that, I'll try and just let me know, and I'll try and post the link to that specific feedback so you guys can pile on. I specifically was asking for SMIME and like PGP or GPG support in the stock Windows 10 Mail app for non-corporate users, for just regular consumers. But yeah, so what I've done is I've kind of been spoiled by Microsoft on the feedback. A lot of sites, if they're not part of the actual feedback program, they have two other ways. Typically, there's a feedback link within each app, and usually those seem to go to a site called User Voice. And User Voice is a subscription service that companies can use to track and organize a community of feedback. And so a lot of times you'll go into the feedback tool or User Voice and you'll search for a problem you're having, and you'll find that thousands of other people are having the same problem, and so you can just upvote it, maybe add a comment, me too, here are the specifics, etc. But yeah, there are other let's see, and also like Twitter and Facebook and stuff are good ways to provide feedback, or official forums. So usually clicking the feedback link is going to expose you to all the different ways to do that. In the case of Microsoft, the feedback app, User Voice if applicable, and forums and social media seem to be good ways to get messages back. And you can tell they're looking at them because you will typically, it's not uncommon in social media to get some kind of response like, oh, is this, was this happening in this situation? Which reminds me, there's a tweet I need to respond to where they were asking me for more information about one of the items I posted. So the people at Microsoft seem to be really on top of it. They actually have people who are relatively senior people, and it's their job to go out and organize this feedback and turn it into actionable product features. And some of these product features are things that people have been asking for years, and they kind of unveil it. They're like, hey, you've been asking for this for years and years through various forms of feedback, and we agree, and so with this release we're announcing such and such feature. One thing that I've seen though is there are a lot of people that, they claim it's a privacy issue to do that, and I can see that. You are absolutely going to give away information about your machine's configuration if you do that. To me, it's worth it. It has been worth it so far. They have warnings all over, like don't include personally identifiable information, and they have processes to try to anonymize it. But there's that risk, and so I get that. I just don't think I just think that having your software work for you is worth that. The other thing is that I just get people, and they just seem to have an extremely negative, like they don't want to spend the time on it, and because they don't think it's going to do any good, and they've really made up their mind that it's not going to do any good in spite of the evidence. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and they were saying that there was some feature that it just drives them crazy, and they went and they looked it up, and they saw that there was a bunch of feedback on it, and then they didn't like, the look of the feedback. They read through it, and they just didn't like what the conclusion was, and so they just concluded that the software was horrible and that they were going to start hating on it, and they were not going to provide any feedback themselves on the specifics. And I said, well, I think I read that they announced that they fixed that. No, they didn't fix it. So it's this like kind of vague thing where I asked them, I said, well, please, I would like, anytime you come up with things like that, I mean, when I recommend stuff, I stand by it, and I stand by it to the extent where I'm going to share whatever information I can. Like a friend of mine recently bought a Surface after I talked about my positive experiences with Surfaces. And there's a limit to what I can do. Like there are things that I don't know how to fix on them. But what I do for everyone that I recommend something to is I at least tell them how I would go about getting it fixed, and I link them to anything I know about that will help them. So I think it's really important for me, for my integrity, that if I recommend something to someone, that I stand by it and try and support it. And in the case of some of this software that I've recommended, that the person was giving me feedback the other day, I recommend it, I like it, I don't really notice the problems that the other user is having, but I do have, a little bit, I do have some level of relationship with the development team through social media, and so to me, I want other people on my team to like the software so that they'll continue using it. So it's important to me to try to help work out some of these differences, because if that doesn't happen, then there's just going to be more and more sentiment against the tools and toward others, and a lot of them I don't like as well. And one of the chief reasons is that when I go to provide feedback, I get no response. It's a vacuum chamber, and in some cases you go and you look up a feedback item and you find an article 5 years ago that reveals the philosophy of the software and makes it clear that that feature will never be included because it goes against the core design philosophy of the product. And that's fine, but you got to kind of get that out of the way. You got to figure that out early. And so oftentimes when I'm looking at a product, one of the very first things I do is I go and I look for feedback. A lot of times before I buy something, I'll look to see if they have a manual online, or I'll ask for the manual from the manufacturer. And sometimes I'll dig through the manual and I won't have a question answered. I had a question about a GoPro product, and I asked them if it had a feature, and it wasn't clear from the manual, and I told them that. And I ended up talking to their sales team, which tended to deal with new products, and I asked them about this particular feature, how it was going to work. And they told me up front. They said, well, it's early in development, and it might have that feature in a future version, but right now it doesn't have that feature. And so that's one of the reasons I didn't go for that product yet, is because I was looking for that. So yeah, I just think it's you're not really getting, and this goes for everything. This goes for like socks or pocket knives or lamps or whatever. It's really good to provide feedback if talking about the things that you like and the things that you don't like. And I've done that a lot, and I think it serves me well, and so I'd encourage other people to make it a part of their routine. When you're giving criticism, try to make it constructive. I think it really makes your feedback stand out if you're giving really good constructive criticism. You're sending photos, you're sending you're sending like screenshots, you're sending maybe videos of you using, like through a screen capture, videos of you using the software and having the error telemetry where possible. These things are very important to getting the issue fixed. And if the companies you're working with have a track record of taking that feedback and solving problems with it, then I think it's hard not to, prefer those products. And if there's not really a community or a set of values around the product about making it feedback driven and making it having a community of users that feel it's important that we're all making this product better for us together, then I tend to shy away from some of those products. And a lot of them, they're known for being community driven, but I don't, when I go and I dig in, I don't really see that happening. I think it's a lot of talk. So anyway, just wanted to talk about the importance of that. And if anyone has questions about how they might do it, it's amazing just having this kind of mindset of providing feedback on everything from the grocery store I go to the software products I buy. One thing that's interesting is I've ended up talking to a lot of C-level executives and CEOs, especially with smaller companies, and I've just told them, I've said like, hey, I really like your product, but I encountered this obstacle with it, and I think you should know about it just so that when you're developing future versions or improvements, you can take that into account. And they're so used to, I think, getting just screaming people threatening to sue them, that especially the smaller companies, that when they get someone who has given as much thought to the good use of their product as they have, then they can't help but want to take some time to think about it in the same way with you. And so I think over time it's a really good strategy. It's a way to help make your life better by helping others. And I also say that as someone who's worked as a software engineer. I've worked on products that were driven by internal feedback and by direct user feedback, and it's really, it really makes a world of difference when you're able to provide a lot of detail as to what exactly went wrong. And, in some cases, even where I try to provide telemetry and stuff, there are just some cases where all I have to go on is that a problem happened. And I provide feedback on that too. I said, I would love to provide you with telemetry and screenshots and stuff, but when I turned on the device, the app started, the app crashed, and I couldn't get any telemetry, and it's just like, hopefully you can reproduce it so that you can maybe add in some feature where we can get telemetry off of that, or maybe sometimes telemetry exists automatically, but I need to go and collect it for them, and so it's good to be able to have those kinds of channels. So anyway, I'm going to share this with some of my friends, technical and non-technical, and I'd love to hear their feedback on it. I think the tools are better than ever. Sites like User Voice and the feedback tool in Windows 10. These things are better than they've ever been. It's so easy to provide feedback now. A lot of this capability is just built in. So it really takes like 5 minutes or less to provide some feedback. And then maybe a quarter or two down the road, a couple months, you might start seeing enhancements to the product that you gave feedback on. So yeah, I think we're really in a changing world, and it's a time where there are going to be two types of software development organizations: the ones that build their products with constant user feedback in mind, and the ones that don't. And I was just telling someone yesterday, is like, the difference between Windows 8 and Windows 10 is the result of a huge amount of customer feedback. And I really liked the way that Windows 8 was going, and I like that in making Windows 10 more like Windows 7, they were able to keep a lot of the things that they liked. But there are still some things that they got rid of that I really liked. I liked the Charms Bar approach, where they took common functionality that should be available in all apps, and they extracted it out to the OS level and made it much easier for developers to add. So if that strategy carried forward, we would save screen real estate and complexity by having those common features like search and everything abstracted out. And it would have, and since it's easier for developers that way, then we would have had more apps that have those capabilities built in. So they took a little bit different direction. I maybe don't like the direction they've gone in as well, but I provided feedback on it, and that is a thing too. Is there are a lot of things I've provided feedback on, and the masses went a different way. So anyway, that's it for me today. I'll see you tomorrow.